Episode 1. The First Prayer. The first miracle saved his life. The second cost her mother's soul. The third was already growing inside her. The chapel stood crooked at the edge of town, its stone walls bent like a man who had knelt too long in prayer. Everyone said it was cursed. Everyone said you should never set foot inside, unless you had nothing left to lose. Lucía Soria had nothing left. She pressed her trembling palm against the rotting oak door. The scent of wet earth and old, forgotten incense seeped through the cracks. Her brother, Mateo, was dying their home just across the barren field. Each breath a ragged plea she could no longer answer. The doctors had stopped coming. The priest had stopped answering. Even the villagers, with their hollow eyes and mumbled prayers, had turned their backs. She had heard the stories. The miracles granted here were real. They were just wrong. Lucía pushed the door open. Inside, darkness breathed around her like a living thing. The pews were split and splintered. The altar collapsed under the weight of invisible sins. In the corner, a baptismal font oozed a thick, black liquid that should have been holy water. She clutched the small silver cross around her neck, the only thing her mother had left her. "Please," Lucía whispered into the gloom, her voice cracking. "Please, I'll give anything." The silence answered, then a whisper, soft, almost kind. "What do you offer?" Lucía's breath hitched. She looked around. No one there, only the crumbling statues of saints, their faces cracked and weeping stone tears. "I offer my faith," she said, though her hand shook. "And my heart, if you ask it." The air shifted, heavy and wet. A figure moved in the shadows, not walking but gliding, as if carried by some unseen current. The figure wore no robes. It wore no face. Only the tattered semblance of wings, blackened, twisted, almost skeletal, hung from its back. "Faith is not enough," the voice said. It seemed to come from the rafters, the floor, the very stones around her. "But your heart will do." Before Lucía could run, the chapel itself seemed to close in around her. The floorboards buckled under unseen weight. The broken stained glass windows glowed faintly, casting sickly halos across the altar. "Kneel," the voice commanded. She dropped to her knees, too terrified to disobey. "Pray your brother's name," it said. "Mateo," she choked out. "Mateo, Mateo, Mateo." The black baptismal font erupted in a burst of steaming darkness. Shapes writhed in the mist, limbs, faces, mouths frozen mid-scream. Then silence. When Lucía opened her eyes, the figure was gone. The chapel was empty once more. She staggered outside, gasping for air. Across the field, the light in her home flickered. Her mother burst through the door, screaming her name. "Lucía, he's breathing. He's breathing." She ran toward them, sobs breaking loose from her chest. Mateo was alive. Alive. His eyes fluttered open as she threw herself beside him. It was real. The miracle was real. She had done it. She had saved him. But as Lucía kissed his forehead, she caught a glimpse of the silver cross around her neck. It had turned black, and deep inside the chapel of forsaken miracles, something ancient, something patient, smiled for the first time in centuries. Episode 2, The Broken Hymn. A prayer whispered in fear will always be answered, but the one who answers may not be who you think. At first, it was just a song in her dreams. Soft, sweet, the kind her mother used to hum while stitching crosses into the hems of their bedsheets. But Lucía knew better than to be comforted now. The night after Mateo's miraculous recovery, Lucía woke with blood on her pillow. Thin scratches laced her arms like vines. Faint at first, almost delicate, she told herself it was nothing, just nerves, just bad dreams. But the next night, the hymn returned, louder, crawling into her ears even as she tried to shut out with pillows and prayers. Sanctum Delorum, Gloria in Mortem, words twisted in Latin she barely understood, yet some primal part of her soul recognized the meaning, a sanctuary of sorrow, glory in death. She sat up in bed, gasping, clutching the blackened cross at her throat. From the window, she could see the crooked steeple of the chapel silhouetted against the bruised sky. A soft light pulsed behind its shattered stained glass, like a dying heartbeat. The hymn grew louder, and the cuts on her arms reopened. Without her touching them, blood welled in perfect lines across her skin, tracing patterns she dared not decipher. Lucía stumbled from her bed. Her legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself resisted her every step. She made it to the door, her breath clouding in the unnaturally cold air. Outside, the village slept under a thick blanket of dread. No dogs barked, no crickets sang. Even the wind seemed afraid to stir. Only the hymn floated through the darkness, guiding her back to the chapel. The oak door groaned as she pushed it open again. Inside, the shadows recoiled from her presence, but not in fear, in anticipation. The baptismal font still oozed its black ichor. The broken altar still leaned toward the earth like a penitent sinner. But now the statues had moved. Where once they stood tall in eternal piety, they now slumped, mouths agape, stone eyes hollow, hands twisted into obscene parodies of prayer. Lucía stepped forward. Each footfall sent a shudder through the wooden floor, as if the chapel were breathing her in. In the center of the room, where the altar had crumbled, a single sheet of parchment lay waiting, ancient, stained with something darker than ink. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The parchment was covered in musical notes. A hymn, the very one she had heard. But here, the notes bled together. The lines warped into a shape almost like a sigil. A call, a trap, sing, a voice breathed from the rafters. Not the same voice as before. This one was thinner, hungry, desperate. "No," Lucía whispered, backing away. "Sing and you'll be spared," it coaxed. Something cold brushed her ankle. Looking down, she saw thin tendrils of black mist coiling up from the floor, wrapping around her legs like hungry fingers. The parchment in her hand pulsed once, then split apart, the ink running like fresh blood. Lucía dropped it with a cry. The mist tightened. "Sing, or watch your family die in your place." Tears blurred her vision. She squeezed her eyes shut and opened her mouth. But instead of the hymn, only a broken sob escaped. A ripple tore through the chapel. The statues shrieked, a high metallic wail, as their arms snapped and twisted toward her. In that moment, Lucía made a decision. She would not sing their song. She would find her own way out, even if it meant tearing this cursed sanctuary apart brick by brick. She ran. The mist clawed at her heels, the twisted statues reaching, the chapel groaning in fury. Lucía burst into the night, gasping, the blackened cross burning against her skin. Behind her, the chapel's bell tolled once, a low, mournful sound that did not echo through the valley, but sank straight into her bones. As she stumbled back home, Lucía knew one terrible thing for certain. Saving Mateo had not ended her debt. It had only begun, and the chapel would not let her forget. Episode 3, A Mother's Silent Trade. When a prayer is left unanswered, the debt does not vanish. It chooses its own payment. Lucía didn't sleep that night. She sat by Mateo's bedside, watching his chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile miracle she no longer trusted. The bell from the chapel still echoed in her bones, a silent summons she had denied. At some point, her mother appeared in the doorway, her figure framed by the flickering candlelight. "Lucía," she said softly, "come to bed, Hija." But there was something wrong with her voice. Too flat, too sweet, like a song played on broken strings. Lucía turned, her heart twisting. "Mama?" Her mother smiled. Wide. Too wide. The corners of her mouth cracked slightly, but no pain touched her eyes. Her eyes were wrong. Empty. Gone was a warm, stubborn gaze that had scolded and loved Lucía in equal measure. Now, her mother's eyes stared straight through her, voids where love had once lived. Lucía stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. "Mama, what happened?" Her mother only smiled wider, tilting her head to one side like a curious child. Then she said, in a voice soft as funeral silk, "You prayed, didn't you?" Lucía's blood froze. The hymn, the chapel, the whispered deal she hadn't fully made. I didn't agree to anything." Lucía gasped. "I didn't sing." Her mother stepped closer, bare feet whispering against the cracked wooden floor. The candlelight revealed something Lucía hadn't noticed before. Around her mother's wrists were faint black marks, like chains made of smoke, biting deep into her skin. "You prayed," her mother repeated, "and someone must pay." The air grew heavy. The room seemed to lean in around them, walls breathing, floorboards groaning. Mateo whimpered in his sleep. Lucía shook her head, tears spilling over. "No, no, take me instead." Her mother placed a finger against Lucía's lips, hushing her. "It's too late," she said. "The dead has been collected." Lucía tried to grab her, tried to shake her awake, but her mother's body was cold and light, as if hollowed out from the inside. Still smiling, her mother leaned forward and whispered into Lucía's ear, "Protect him. Protect what you saved." Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned and walked away, out the door, into the night. Lucía ran after her, but outside, the street was empty. No footprints in the dust. No sign of movement. Only the lingering scent of burnt incense and wet earth. And somewhere far across the village, the crooked steeple of the chapel pulsed once more with a dull, sickly light. The next morning, the villagers found her mother's body floating in the river. No wounds, no struggle, just her, lying still as a fallen saint, the black marks on her wrists blooming like dark roses. When they buried her, no priest came to bless the grave. No hymns were sung. Only the hollow wind mourned her passing. That night, as Lucía lit a single candle by the window, she saw it, etched in blood across the panes of glass. In letters only visible by the trembling flame, one life for another. The chapel remembers. Lucía sank to her knees. She had thought the chapel was a place of forgotten miracles. But now she knew the chapel never forgot. It simply waited. And it always collected. Episode 4, The Choir of Hollow Saints. Not every prayer reaches heaven. Some are caught midway and twisted into something that sings back. The village had begun to rot from the inside out. In the days after her mother's death, a sickness spread, quiet, creeping, as if despair itself was contagious. Children refused to speak. Old men sat motionless for hours, their mouths moving in silent prayer. The river dried to a black trickle, thick and foul. Lucía stayed locked inside the house, tending to Mateo with trembling hands. Every night, she heard them, the choir. It began with a low hum, almost comforting. But as the night deepened, the voices rose, layered, broken, wrong. They sang not in Latin, nor in any tongue Lucía recognized, but in a sound that scraped against the soul itself. A song of hunger, a song of empty throats desperate to be filled. On the third night, she could bear it no longer, clutching the blackened cross around her neck. Lucía wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped into the street. The village was silent, but not the chapel. From its cracked stained glass windows, a faint, otherworldly glow bled out into the misty night. The steeple leaned a little further toward the earth, as if bowing to something unseen. The choir was louder here. Each note made her teeth ache. Each wordless moan tugged at something deep inside her chest, a sadness she couldn't name but could never escape. Lucía crossed herself and pushed open the chapel door. Inside, she froze. The statues, the saints she had once prayed to as a child, were gone. In their place stood figures she barely recognized. Their marble faces had cracked open, mouths stretched impossibly wide, as if mid-scream. Hands clawed the air, reaching for something or someone they could never grasp. And they sang, 100 broken saints, their hollow voices weaving a symphony of despair that wrapped around her like chains. Lucía stumbled back, nearly gagging on the thick, rotten air. One of the statues turned its shattered face toward her. Its eyes, if they could still be called eyes, gleamed wet and black. From its ruined mouth came a single, gurgling word. Lucía. She ran. But the chapel was no longer the place she remembered. The aisle stretched unnaturally long. The pews twisted and shifted, blocking her path. Everywhere the choir sang, their voices rising higher, scraping against the inside of her skull. Come to the altar, join the song. Pay your tithe. Lucía covered her ears, sobbing, but the sound was inside her now, vibrating through her bones. Somewhere ahead, she saw it. The ruined altar bathed in a sickly red light. On it lay a figure. Small. Still. Mateo. No! She screamed, forcing her way forward. The statues clawed at her shawl, tore at her skin, but she fought through them, desperate, wild. When she reached the altar, her heart shattered. It wasn't Mateo. It was her own body, pale and still, laid out like a sacrificial offering. The black cross rested on her chest, gleaming as if freshly forged. Lucía staggered back. Behind her, the statues pressed closer, their cracked faces twisted in what might have been grief or hunger. The choir's song changed. No longer a dirge, but a triumph, a welcome. One of us, they sang. One of us. Lucía turned and fled. She burst into the cold night air, collapsed in the dirt, choking on her own screams. The chapel door slammed shut behind her with a sound like a coffin lid sealing. She lay there until the sun rose, too broken to move, too afraid to breathe. When she finally staggered home, bloodied and shaking, she found a single message scrawled in ash across the front door. The choir has claimed your name. Lucía touched her throat. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't feel her own heartbeat. The chapel was no longer just a place she had visited. It was inside her now, and it had begun to sing. Episode 5. The Third Wish's Womb. Every miracle demands a birthplace, even the unholy ones. For days, Lucía couldn't bear to look at herself in the mirror. She moved through the house like a ghost, caring for Mateo with mechanical tenderness, her mind a churning sea of fear and denial. But the changes were undeniable. At first, it was the dreams. Lucía floating in a black river, something cold and soft curling around her ankles, pulling her downward as lullabies in broken Latin echoed through the mist. Then came the sickness, a deep, hollow ache in her bones, a constant, gnawing hunger no food could ease. Finally, her body began to betray her. Her belly, flat and slender just a week ago, now bulged slightly, rounded in a way that could not be explained by sickness alone. She hadn't been with anyone. She hadn't even kissed a boy. And yet, there it was, growing, moving. Lucía stood in front of a cracked mirror, hands trembling as she lifted her nightdress. Beneath her skin, something shifted, slow, deliberate. Not a child, not anything God would have ever allowed. A tear slid down her cheek. The chapel had taken her prayer and planted something inside her, a third miracle, a third curse. That night, the humming returned. Not from outside, not from the chapel. From within, Lucía clutched her abdomen, biting down on a scream as a low vibration rattled through her ribs. The same tune the hollow saints had sung, the same twisted him, now hummed by something growing under her heart. She fell to her knees, retching, but nothing came up except bitter, black bile that steamed against the cold floor. When she looked up, she wasn't alone. Her mother stood in the doorway, but not as Lucía remembered her. The thing wearing her mother's skin smiled with cracked lips and hollow eyes. "You must prepare," it whispered. "The child will soon be born." Lucía scrambled back, her spine hitting the wall. "It's not a child." Her mother's shadow moved closer, splitting and reforming, like a tattered veil caught in a storm. "It is the fruit of your faith," it said, voice a chorus of dozens. "It is what you asked for." Lucía shook her head, sobbing, I never asked for this." The figure knelt beside her, pressing a cold, transparent hand against her swollen belly. "You saved one life," it crooned. "You must birth another." The next morning, the villagers gathered outside her home, not to help, not to pray, but to watch. Their faces were blank. Their mouths moved silently, as if reciting prayers only the damned could hear. Lucía drew the curtains, heart hammering. She was trapped. The chapel's hymn throbbed in her blood. The unborn thing pulsed under her skin, coiling tighter each hour. She could feel its mind brushing against hers now. Curious, hungry, ancient. She knew she had only two choices left. Birth it, or destroy it, even if it meant destroying herself. And she was running out of time. That night, as the moon rose blood-red over broken steeple, Lucía lit a single candle and carved a cross into the floorboards with a kitchen knife. She would not go quietly. She would not bring another monster into this world, not without a fight. Outside, the villagers began to sing, a hollow, rising chorus, a lullaby for a birth that should never happen. Inside, Lucía gritted her teeth, pressed the blade against her trembling skin, and prayed, not to the chapel, not to any false god, but to the only thing left that might hear her own soul. Episode 6, Confessions Unheard. Confession is meant to cleanse the soul. But what if the booth was never meant to forgive you, only to feed on your shame? The candle had long since guttered out. Lucía sat in darkness, the knife clutched in her trembling hand, blood seeping from the shallow cut across her abdomen. But the thing inside her refused to die. It pulsed stronger now, as if nourished by her defiance. From outside, the lullaby continued, hundreds of voices murmuring in broken harmony, serenading the monster she carried. She knew then what she had to do. The chapel hadn't finished with her. And if she wanted answers, if she wanted to tear this curse out of her flesh, she would have to return one final time. The village was deathly silent as she stumbled through the mist. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Only their empty eyes followed her as she passed, mouths moving silently, as if mouthing prayers she could not hear. The chapel loomed ahead, its crooked steeple stabbing into the rotted sky. As she pushed open a heavy door, a wave of cold, damp air swept over her. Inside, the choir was silent, waiting. Lucía stepped carefully down the aisle, her bloody dress dragging across the cracked stone floor. There, at the far end of the chapel, half hidden behind the collapsed altar, she saw it. The confessional booth. Old, splintered, swallowed by shadow. Its curtains swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. She approached, each step a hammer against her ribs. The thing inside her stirred, sensing where she was going. The curtain parted for her, without a touch. Inside, the booth was cramped and cold. The wooden bench groaned under her weight as she knelt, clutching the small cross at her throat. She stared at the tiny, rusted grill between her and the priest's side. No light shone through it, only darkness and a breath, shallow and slow. Lucía swallowed hard. "Forgive me, Father," she whispered, "for I have sinned." Silence. Then a low creak, as if something massive shifted on the other side. "Speak." The voice rasped, dry as dead leaves. She closed her eyes. "I prayed for a miracle," she said. "I begged for my brother's life." The shadows behind the grill pulsed. "And you were given what you asked," the voice said. "But it cost," she choked. "It cost everything." The confessional seemed to lean closer. "Speak your true sin." Lucía clutched her belly. "I doubted," she whispered. "I doubted the price would be worth it." A thin, cold laughter slithered through the grill. "Doubt is not your true sin, child," the voice said. "Selfishness is." She shook her head, tears blinding her. "I didn't know." "You hoped you could cheat the cost," the voice crooned. "You hoped you could bargain with forces you did not understand." The booth darkened, the wood groaning under invisible pressure. Lucía's hand shook. "Then tell me how to stop it," she pleaded. "Tell me how to end this." Silence. Then a whisper, so soft she had to press her ear to the grill to hear. "Confess it all. Everything you've hidden. Everything you've buried." Lucía's breath hitched. Memories surged. Things she had tried to forget. The night she had let Mateo climb the tree too high. Then lied to their mother about it. The moment she had stolen food from the church pantry during the famine. The jealousy she had felt when her best friend survived the fever, and she hadn't. Petty things. Ugly things. Things she had buried under prayers and silence. Tears streamed down her face. "I confess," she whispered. "I confess it all." The chapel shuddered. Behind the grill, something moved, large, slow, and terribly patient. The wood of the booth splintered. The shadows thickened. And then she heard it. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. but feeding. The confessional was drinking her sins, sucking them in like marrow from broken bones. And with each secret torn from her, Lucía felt herself growing lighter. Hollow, she clutched at her abdomen. The thing inside her moved hungrily, writhing with delight as the confessional devoured her shame. Lucía screamed. Too late, she understood. The chapel didn't want to absolve her. It wanted to hollow her out, to make room for the thing it had planted inside her. The booth collapsed outward, spilling her onto the cold stone floor. Lucía lay there, gasping, trembling. Above her, the statues of the hollow saints stared down, not in judgment, but in hunger. The choir began to sing again, this time not a lullaby, not a dirge, but a birth song. And in her belly, the third miracle pressed against her ribs, eager to be born. Episode 7, The Baptism of the Damned. Not every baptism brings salvation. Some drown you in something that was never meant to be holy. Lucía barely remembered how she got to the altar. One moment she was writhing on the chapel floor. The next she was carried, not by hands, but by the cold, unseen will of the place itself. The hollow saints watched on the walls, their mouths agape in silent hymns. The villagers stood in neat rows along the aisles, their faces blank, their eyes glistening like whetstones. No one spoke. No one wept. They only waited. At the center of the ruined altar, where once a priest might bless the faithful, now stood a font, a monstrous basin carved from blackened bone and twisted iron. It steamed with a viscous, tar-like substance that reeked of rust, rot, and old prayers long since turned sour. Lucía struggled, but the invisible hands held her fast. The thing inside her moved eagerly, pulsing against her ribs in time with the pounding hymn that vibrated through the stone floor. This was its moment, not a birth, a baptism. From the crowd, 4 figures emerged, draped in robes darker than night, faces hidden behind veils stitched from human hair. They carried long, jagged knives etched with symbols that seemed to crawl when Lucía tried to read them. The first priest spoke, a guttural croak that echoed to the chapel like a death rattle. We welcome the new flesh. The second priest raised his blade. We cleanse the vessel. The third priest reached into the basin with a skeletal hand, scooping up the black ichor that bubbled within. The fourth priest turned toward Lucía, voice trembling with unnatural reverence. We baptize you, Mother of Miracles forsaken. Lucía screamed as the black liquid was poured over her head. It burned like acid, seeping into her pores, down her throat, into her lungs. She gagged and choked, thrashing against the unseen force pinning her down. Visions exploded behind her eyes. Her mother's hollow face, the choir of broken saints, the twisted fetus curling tighter inside her, whispering songs of hunger and ruin. She was drowning, not in water, but in despair so thick it wrapped around her soul and squeezed. Her skin blistered under the unholy baptism, old wounds from her confessions tearing open, new ones birthing across her flesh. The crowd began to hum, a low, discordant chant that rattled the very air. The priests pressed their hands against her soaked body, marking her with sigils that burned brighter than fire. Lucía felt herself slipping, not just her body, her soul. Piece by piece, memory by memory, the chapel was consuming her. And still, the thing inside her grew stronger. She could feel it stretching, opening invisible jaws within her, ready to be born not into light, but into corruption. Tears streamed from her eyes, but the black ichor swallowed them before they could fall. Please, she gasped, her voice a shredded whisper. Please, no more. The head priest leaned down, so close she could smell the decay leaking from beneath his veil. It is already done, he whispered. You are the womb. You are the sacrifice. You are the beginning of the end. With a final guttural chant, the priest withdrew. The invisible grip released her. Lucía collapsed onto stone, the black ichor steaming around her in a dark halo. Above her, the broken stained glass windows blazed with crimson light, casting distorted images of saints and demons locked in endless, bloody battle. The choir roared. The villagers lifted their arms in silent worship, and inside her, the third miracle awoke. Lucía opened her mouth to scream, but only the chapel's hymn came out, The baptism was complete, and the birth had begun. Episode 8. The Feast of False Angels. Those who wore halos once, now wear teeth. Lucía woke to the smell of burning incense. Sharp, acrid, wrong. The black baptism still clung to her skin like a second, rotting flesh. Every breath tasted of ashes and old blood. Around her, the chapel had transformed. The broken pews were gone. The cracked stones gleamed wet and red, as if the walls themselves had been skinned. And in the center of it all, a table had been set, long, grotesque, carved from fused human bones, each spine arched in eternal agony, each skull grinning in frozen rapture. Upon the table, platters overflowed with meat, raw, glistening, still twitching, fruits blackened and bloated with rot, goblets brimming with a dark liquid thicker than wine. It was a feast, a holy banquet prepared not for saints, but for the forsaken. The choir of hollow saints stood behind the table, draped in ragged robes, their broken mouths twisted into mockeries of joy. At the head of the table sat the 4 priests who had baptized her, their veiled faces slick with the same black ichor that had marked her. The villagers filed in, their steps rhythmic, mechanical. Each wore a crown of thorns woven too tightly, blood dripping in delicate threads down their temples. Each carried a piece of meat, a chunk of themselves. They smiled as they placed their offerings on the table. Lucía struggled to her feet, nausea roiling in her gut. What is this?" she rasped. The head priest rose. His voice rolled to the chapel like thunder made of teeth. The feast of the new covenant. The breaking of the old flesh to feed the new. He gestured toward her swollen belly, where the third miracle ride beneath her ribs. "You carry the seed of rebirth, Lucía. Now you must nourish it." The villagers began to eat, ravenous. They tore into rotten meat with broken teeth, their mouths stretching impossibly wide, devouring everything in blind ecstasy. Some wept as they ate. Some laughed. Some sang wordless hymns that dripped from their tongues like black oil. The choir swayed, their hollow voices rising into a cacophony of worship and madness. Lucía backed away, bow rising in her throat. "No," she whispered. "I won't." The head priest smiled behind his veil. "You already have." Lucía looked down, her hands slick with blood, her mouth stained dark. She had eaten. She had joined the feast. Whether in dream or delirium, she had already fed the miracle. The thing inside her kicked, hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. It was growing faster now, fueled by the corrupted communion. She stumbled backward, her mind fracturing under the weight of horror. And then she saw it. At the far end of the table, where the largest, most grotesque offering lay, a mass of limbs and weeping eyes, a new figure rose. Not a saint, not a priest, an angel, but twisted wrong. Wings stitched from the skins of the dead. A halo made of broken bone. Eyes that bled endless tears of black. It staggered toward her on legs too thin to hold its weight, arms reaching, mouth open in a silent scream. The villagers cheered. The choir sang louder. The priest bowed. The angel knelt before Lucía, pressing its rotting forehead against her swollen belly. And in a voice made of 1,000 stolen prayers, it whispered, "Mother." Lucía fell to her knees, the taste of rot thick on her tongue. The chapel shuddered around her. The feast was ending. The birth was near. And no prayer she could speak now would stop it. Episode 9. The Bell That Never Rung. There are bells that call the faithful to prayer, and bells that summon what should never have been heard. The feast had ended, but the air inside the chapel still pulsed with unseen life. Lucía knelt on the blood-slick stones, her body trembling under the weight of the thing growing inside her. Around her, the villagers slumped in their seats, bloated and dazed, whispering broken hymns under their breath. The false angel stood silent and watching, its weeping gaze fixed upon her, as if awaiting a command she didn't understand. The head priest approached, his steps slow, deliberate. From within his tattered robe, he withdrew a heavy, rusted key. So ancient it seemed more bone than metal. Without speaking, he dropped it into Lucía's lap. It was cold, too cold. "The bell tower waits," he said. Lucía clutched the key, feeling the weight of destiny or damnation settle in her bones. She knew, without being told, that she had no choice. The chapel demanded completion. The entrance of the bell tower was hidden behind the altar, a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. Lucía climbed, one hand on the wall for balance, the other clutching her belly where the third miracle stirred hungrily. The further she ascended, the colder it became. Each breath burned her lungs. Each step echoed with a hollow finality. The tower walls were covered in carvings, names, prayers, screams etched so deeply into the stone they bled dark tears. At the top, a heavy iron door waited. The key trembled in her hand as she slid it into the lock. The door groaned open, and Lucía stepped into a place the world had long forgotten. The bell dominated the tower room, massive, blackened, cracked down its middle like a wound refusing to heal. Chains, thick as a man's arm, bound it in place, wrapped tight around its body, sealing its mouth shut. And yet, Lucía could hear it, not with her ears, with her blood. A low, endless hum, vibrating in her very marrow. The hum of a bell that was never meant to ring. Etched along the rim of the bell were words she could barely decipher through the rust and rot. Vocate Dam, vocate Nihilum. Call God, call nothing. She staggered forward, compelled by a force she couldn't resist. At the base of the bell lay a small pedestal, and atop it, a hammer, heavy, ancient, slick with something darker than rust. The false angel appeared at her side, silent and reverent. It reached out, guiding her trembling hand toward the hammer. Lucía pulled back. "No," she whispered. "I won't." The angel's ruined face twisted, not in anger, but in sorrow. "You already have," it said. She looked down. The black ichor from her baptism still clung to her skin. The feast still churned in her blood. The third miracle still grew within her. The bell had been waiting for her. She was the toll. Tears blurred her vision. "I didn't ask for this," she sobbed. The chapel groaned, the stones shifting beneath her feet, the tower itself leaning closer, demanding its due. Below, she heard the villagers rising, chanting, marching toward the tower. The choir screamed from the chapel, a song of birth and ending. Lucía pressed her forehead against the cold iron of the bell. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then, with all the strength she had left, she lifted the hammer and struck. The sound that erupted from the bell was not a ring. It was a shattering, a rupture, a scream that split the sky itself. The chains binding the bell snapped like spider silk. The cracked metal peeled back, splitting open like a mouth gasping for air. And from within the broken hollow, something answered, a darkness older than God, older than the earth itself, poured from the bell, sweeping to the tower, the chapel, the village. Lucía was thrown to the ground, the hammer clattering from her hand. She clutched her belly, feeling the third miracle thrash wildly inside her. The villagers below fell to their knees, howling. The choir collapsed, their hollow bodies disintegrating into ash. The false angel wept black blood, its broken wings shuddering. And in the sky above, the stars blinked out, one by one. The world had heard the bell that should never have rung, and it was answering. Episode 10, the fourth benediction. A benediction is a blessing, but what if the blessing comes from something that has never loved you? The world beyond the chapel had fallen silent. No wind stirred. No bird sang. The very sky hung heavy, a bruised sheet of purple and black, torn by veins of dying light. Lucía lay broken at the base of the shattered bell, the echo of its forbidden toll still vibrating through her bones. The third miracle inside her convulsed, clawing against her ribs, desperate to emerge. Around her, the villagers writhed in agony, their bodies bending in ways no human form should endure, mouths spilling black hymns that melted the air. The false angel hovered at the edge of her vision, wings twitching, whispering broken prayers to the thing now awakening. Lucía knew the fourth benediction had begun. Not a gift, not a salvation, a coronation of ruin. And she, Lucía, was to be its unwilling high priestess. The head priest staggered up the ruined staircase, his robes in tatters, his veiled face eaten away by the dark force pouring from the bell. Yet he still clutched the ancient ritual book, its pages alive with squirming, ink-black script. He approached Lucía with trembling reverence. "Rise, mother of the new flesh," he croaked. Lucía tried to crawl away, but the floor itself had turned traitor. Sticky, pulsing like raw meat, dragging her back toward the altar of the bell. The priest opened the book. The fourth benediction was written not in words, but in living blood, script that twisted and wept and hungered for completion. He began to chant. As he spoke, the villagers rose as one, their mouths sewn shut by invisible threads, their eyes hollowed out and glowing from within. They formed a circle around Lucía, swaying in a slow, terrible rhythm. The false angel descended, kneeling beside her, pressing a clawed hand to her forehead. From deep within, Lucía felt her body responding, not from her will, but from the command of the chapel itself. Her hands lifted, her mouth opened. The hymn poured out, not a scream, not a plea, but a sacrament she could not resist. Through blood, we are bound. Through flesh, we are reborn. Through the mother, we are made whole. The words tore through her throat like glass, yet she could not stop. The fourth blessing was not a gift she gave. It was wrung from her. The ground split open beneath the bell. From the fissure crawled something vast, too large, too ancient to be fully seen. Tendrils of shadow and bone, eyes that blinked once every century, mouths that sang the first song of the void. It was not a god. It was a memory of when gods were slaughtered, and it had been waiting for her. Lucía screamed, but the scream became a prayer. The prayer became a promise. The promise became a chain wrapped around her soul. She felt the third miracle inside her reach toward the thing. Felt it answer. The villagers fell to their knees. The false angel spread its broken wings wide. The priest completed the chant. Receive her. Receive us all. The chapel shook to its foundations. The altar cracked open like a rotten egg, spilling black blood and broken icons across the floor. Lucía's body lifted into the air, arms outstretched, her belly distended with the pulsing, living mass inside. Above her, the darkness formed a crude crown, a halo of thorns and teeth. And in that terrible moment, she understood. She was no longer Lucía. She was the mother of the unblessed, and she would birth not a child, but a kingdom of ruin. With a final, shuddering breath, the thing inside her began to tear its way free, and the fourth benediction was fulfilled. Episode 11, the scripture of the unredeemed. Some scriptures guide you toward salvation. Others are written to make sure you never find your way back. The chapel lay in ruins. The altar was nothing but shattered stone and black ichor. The stained glass had exploded outward, raining broken saints across the desecrated floor. And in the center of it all, Lucía knelt. She was no longer the girl who had once whispered prayers into the night. The fourth benediction had scorched her soul, left her branded by something far older and crueler than faith. Her hands trembled, slick with blood, not all of it hers. The third miracle inside her thrashed, clawing for the world beyond her flesh. But somewhere deep inside, some stubborn, forgotten piece of Lucía still fought, still remembered. She would not surrender without knowing why. Why this chapel? Why these people? Why her? She needed answers, and the chapel, in its endless cruelty, was ready to give them. A soft rustling drew her gaze toward the far end of the ruined hall. There, among the rubble, a single book sat untouched by the devastation. It pulsed faintly as if breathing. The scripture of the unredeemed. Lucía staggered toward it, each step toward her body. Each heartbeat felt like it could rip her open, but she pressed forward, drawn by something deeper than fear. She knelt before the book and reached out. The moment her fingers touched its cracked leather cover, the chapel sighed, as if in satisfaction. The pages turned on their own, revealing words not written in ink, but in living veins that writhed against the parchment. She forced herself to read, and what she found unraveled what little hope she had left. The scripture was no gospel. It was a confession, a record of every soul who had ever entered the chapel in search of miracles. Every prayer, every bargain, every betrayal. It spoke of men and women who had begged for healing, for love, for power, only to be twisted into hollow saints, false angels, and beasts that fed the chapel's endless hunger. None had escaped. None had been saved. They had all been consumed, reborn as vessels for the old hunger that slept beneath the bell. And now, Lucía was to be the final chapter, the perfect vessel, the mother of a new blight. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept reading. Deeper into the book, scratched in frantic, desperate hand, she found something different. A single prophecy, forgotten, buried, almost obliterated. When the mother of the unblessed awakens, there shall come one who carries both blessing and curse. One who remembers the first name of the chapel. Only she who speaks its true name shall unmake it. Lucía's heart stuttered. The chapel had a name that had been stolen, buried under centuries of rot and silence. And if she could find it, if she could speak it, she could end this. She could break the cycle. But the scripture was incomplete. The true name had been ripped out, the page torn, the blood-stained edges still smoldering with ancient fire. Lucía clutched the book to her chest, the third miracle raging inside her. There was no time. Already, the villagers, no longer human, no longer themselves, were stirring. Already, the false angel was weeping black tears, its twisted mouth forming the words of the final hymn. Already, the chapel itself was beginning to rise, cracking its foundations in the earth like a beast stirring from hibernation. She had one chance, one impossibly small, broken sliver of hope. Find the first name, speak it, and tear this nightmare down before the miracle inside her tore her apart. Lucía wiped the blood from her mouth and stood. Her legs shook, her heart faltered, but her soul, scarred and battered, held firm. The scripture pulsed in her hands like a living thing, guiding her toward the next step, toward the final confrontation. The chapel had given her life, had given her death. Now it would give her war, and Lucía would be the one to end it. Episode 12, The Mass for the Dead. Some masses are sung for the lost. Others are spoken by the damned, to bury what was never meant to rise. The chapel was no longer still. Its walls throbbed like muscle. Its roof cracked and groaned like ribs spreading for breath. The altar had become a gaping wound in the earth, fleshless, pulsing, ready to birth the thing inside her. Lucía stood in the center of it all, bathed in ash and blood. The scripture, the unredeemed, pressed to her chest like a shield. The third miracle inside her clawed, twisted, kicked, eager to be born, to break her open and sing it to him across the world. She would not let it, not now, not when she had learned the truth. Around her, the villagers circled. No longer men and women, but hollowed husks stitched with faith and rot, their mouths sewn shut, their fingers broken from too many prayers. They moved with the grace of marionettes pulled by a divine disease. Above them, the false angel hovered like a ruined moon, its wings stretching wide, blocking out what little sky remained. Its voice echoed through the bones of the chapel. Begin the Massachusetts. Lucía raised the book. She did not open it. She tore it, page by page. The blood script writhed and screamed as she ripped its lies apart. The choir shrieked. The villagers clutched their faces. The walls bled. Lucía stood tall, defiant. This will not be a mass for birth, she shouted. This is a mass for the dead. For my mother, for my brother, for every soul you devoured. The chapel howled. 1,000 voices, 1,000 mouths. The air turned black with ash. The floor split. The thing beneath, the old hunger, rose. It was not one form. It was all forms. Limbs of saints, faces of sinners, wings made from prayers never answered. And it was hungry. Lucía felt it reaching through her, into her womb, into the miracle waiting to be born. But she held her ground. Her hands shook. Her body trembled. Yet her voice, her soul, did not waver. She raised her hand and began to chant. Not the hymn of the chapel, not the false benediction, but the name, the first name, the one whispered to her by the last torn page of the scripture in a dream soaked with blood. Ecclesia Innis, the empty church, the name before the chapel was corrupted, before the miracles became mouths, before the saints hollowed. The ground shook. The old hunger screamed, its mouth frothing, limbs writhing. The miracle inside her began to unravel, its shape shifting, unraveling from within. Lucía screamed the name again. Ecclesia in knees. The false angel fell from the sky, wings burning. The villagers burst like overripe fruit, their hollow prayers silenced. The choir crumbled into dust, their robes collapsing onto bones. And the chapel, the beast wearing its skin, howled as it died. Stone cracked, blood ignited. The bell tower imploded into flame. Lucía dropped to her knees, the miracle inside her screaming in its final death throes. She clutched her stomach, weeping, laughing, burning. Her soul had been torn in half to get here. But she had done it. The cycle was broken. As dawn broke over a sky that no longer bled, Lucía lay beneath the shattered ribs of what had once been the chapel of forsaken miracles. Alone, alive, no longer a mother, but something more dangerous. A witness. Episode 13. The fifth and final miracle. The first miracle saved a life. The second stole a soul. The third grew in her womb. The fourth summoned the end. And the fifth was her. The chapel no longer stood. Only ash and bone remained, scattered across the hollow hill like forgotten prayers. Lucía sat among the wreckage, her back to the rising sun, her hands streaked with soot and blood. Her womb was empty now. But she had not died, not entirely. And that was the cruelest part. She remembered fire. She remembered the sky tearing open as the old hunger screamed, as the false angel fell, as the villagers were swallowed by the very God they had worshipped. She remembered speaking the first name, Ecclesia in knees, and how the earth had trembled in recognition, like a corpse remembering it had once been a child. She had broken the cycle. She had silenced the choir. But silence was not peace, and what remained was not salvation. For 3 days, she wandered the dead village. No birds, no voices, no ghosts, only Lucía, and the shadow of the thing that had tried to be born through her. On the 4th day, she found the altar stone, cracked and blackened, but beneath it, something waited. A seed, small, pulsing faintly with warmth. Shaped not like a child, but like a heart carved from memory. She lifted it in her hands and felt everything. All the prayers, all the pain, all the people who had entered the chapel, begging for miracles but giving more than they ever knew. Their hopes, their regrets, their guilt, they were inside her now. Lucía clutched the seed to her chest, eyes closed. I was never the mother, she whispered. I was a grave. She walked beyond the village, across the dead river, into the forest where no prayers had been spoken for centuries. And there, beneath an ancient tree, she dug, with bare hands, with cracked nails. She planted the seed, not in holy ground, but in clean ground, untouched, unafraid. And as she covered with soil, the wind stirred for the first time, soft, almost like breath. Lucía stood, the morning light catching her in gold and dust. And somewhere far below the earth, the chapel sighed its final breath. The fifth miracle was never meant to save, never meant to destroy. It was meant to remember. And now, through her it would. Epilogue. Years passed. Rain fell. The river flowed again. A girl, no more than 6, ran barefoot through the forest, chasing the wind. She stopped at a strange tree, its bark smooth and dark, its roots curling like open hands. She placed her ear to the trunk and smiled. "It's singing," she whispered. Behind her, a woman watched from the hilltop, older now, but her eyes still held the fire of someone who once bore a miracle inside her and lived to tell the story. Lucía turned, her voice soft. "Let it sing."